What is up, Felix here for Thomann synthesizers, and I thought this track that I'm working on right now is a good opportunity to illustrate for you how I approach writing harmonies. And the way in which I work, I think, is much easier and much more intuitive than thinking in terms of chord progressions from the beginning, which often, especially if you don't have a lot of knowledge in music theory, can also be very overwhelming. And I feel like the more you are in your head, the less you are connected with your emotions often. And this technique I prefer because it makes me feel really connected with each and every single note. And this way, at least I personally, always achieve better, more unique results than when I start thinking in terms of chords and music theory from the beginning. But one more very exciting thing before we get started. For the past couple of months, we've been working on the launch of an entirely new electronic music platform over on Instagram. It's called Voltage Labs, and it's centered around all things electronic music. So this might include artist features, live performances, the latest news surrounding music releases, events, gear obviously, and also some educational content. And yeah, we're super happy and passionate about this project, so we'd be happy if you go check it out in case you haven't already. I'm sure it's going to be linked somewhere down below. And now let's get into it. Alright, so now let's have a look at what I did here exactly in order to achieve the following harmony. Yeah, some of you will be familiar with this from another video. In the context of the whole track, it sounds like this. And in the previous video, I was talking about primarily the drum programming of this track. And today we're going to have a look at the polysynths. Alright, as you can see, this consists of 4 main layers, and I arranged it here in such a way for demonstrational purposes that you always see the audio layer first, and then beneath you see the MIDI notes, then the next audio layer, then the MIDI notes, etc. And my basic idea is not thinking in terms of chord progressions and writing the entire chord at once, but rather writing small little themes, looping them, then adding layers of individual notes on top. And also recording them separately with separate envelope settings, for example, or filter settings, because then you can adjust all of these settings individually. You can do panning individually, mix down decisions like stereo placement, volume, compression, whatever, giving you much more flexibility and creative freedom. And if I were to take all of these notes here and play them all at once with the same source, which is this Arturia plugin here, the CS80, which is great but extremely CPU heavy. It's a kind of a nightmare, even for a good computer. It would sound like this. Which is still okay, I guess, but I don't think it's anywhere close to the beauty of this. Yeah, because here the voices have individual panning, different filter settings, different envelopes, different volumes. And now let's look at all of these individual layers. This was kind of like the basic theme. Extremely simple. You just have these 2-note chords. But if you took good care, you recognize that actually all of the notes have a 5th added to them. And what I did is not what you would usually do if you wanted to go for this aesthetic, is that you take an oscillator on the synth and tune it up by 7 semitones. I didn't do that. Instead, I used this MIDI effect here and used a +7. Because this way I can still do subtle detuning between the 2 oscillators of the CS80. And with this detuning knob here, and have this fluttering effect that you get from slightly detuning 2 oscillators. So I'm not using an oscillator just for the 5th, but I basically just send in 2 MIDI notes. So technically these are not 2-note chords, but 4-note chords. And by the way, in this case, this goes for the whole composition. For all of the layers, all of them have this fifth added to them. So obviously this gives you a bit less flexibility in terms of composition of the actual notes, because sometimes the fifth is not going to be in the actual key in which you're in. But yeah, I really like the aesthetic. And yeah, this goes for all of the tracks here. All right, next layer is even more simple, just 1 note at a time. Yeah, on its own, super boring actually, but in the context. The one is panned to the left, the other one to the right a bit. Much more interesting, also because of the distinct filter settings of the individual sounds. And yeah, then let's have a look at the third layer, which is, I think, even quieter and higher. So I would usually start lower, and then go upwards through the frequency spectrum and just add a little bit higher layer with some space in between, and then even a higher layer, etc. To make use of the whole frequency spectrum. And especially now that I've added a fifth to all of the notes, it's especially important to consider to leave some space in between the next layer. Yeah, and then the last layer must be my favorite. Let's listen to the solo first. Yeah, I don't know, it sounds almost organ-like super high notes on an organ, on a church organ. And it's a bit chaotic also, it's not even on the grid at some times, and I really was just playing crazy stuff and then just found this little snippet in it. And I like the chaotic nature of it, and because the notes are so high and so thin, and I mix them in relatively quietly, so in the context, it's a beautiful little bit of chaos, I think. And then one more thing that you could do with a sound like this, which I always really enjoy, is adding some auto pan. But not just the boring old left and right in an equal tempo, but rather, this obviously works better on headphones or if you're sitting in the center of monitors, almost performatively adjusting the rate of the auto pan. And especially once you get close to the audio rate frequencies here, like 30 Hertz, I think there's some really beautiful effect, almost like an additional sound is being created. And then here in the whole context, maybe also with the bass line. Yeah, could do this for hours, but if you were too lazy to do it yourself, you could just also use an LFO to modulate it for you. But then this movement also gets kind of boring, kind of quick, because it's so predictable. So what you could do is you could take a second LFO and map it to the rate of the first LFO, and now you have infinite variation on the sound. And I find that roughly 16 Hertz is actually perfect for the maximum rate of the autopan. And now in the whole context. Alright, that's it for this example. But now in case you ask what are some possible hardware solutions to achieve similar sounds, obviously the Deckard's Dream is an obvious choice, but since that is outside the range of the budget of many, I would say one tier lower would be the Prophet 5, and I've done plenty of videos on both of them actually, so you just have to look them up here on the channel. The cheapest alternative I think would be the Yamaha Rephase CS, which I also featured in another video. Although it's completely digital, I absolutely love the sound of it. And as you can hear already, it's beautiful for creating super complex pad sounds. But you have to keep in mind that it's completely digital. Yeah, just like this VST, obviously. But I think it just sounds super lovely. But what I like about the VST here, the CS80 VST, maybe we can have a look at it. It's just this first row that you see here. It's identical to the second one, and they both represent what you can do with one of the oscillators, basically. Filter settings, filter envelope, volume envelope, waveform selection, pulse width modulation, all that kind of stuff, twice, and then you can mix it here, basically. And yeah, I think this sounds super lovely, but it's super CPU heavy. Another solution in the software realm would be Super 8 by Native Instruments, which also sounds amazing. And now lastly, I thought, since I have it lying around at the moment anyways, I'm gonna try and see how these notes sound through the Nymphs by Dreadbox, because at the moment I'm considering what kind of polysynth I can use for live sets, because traveling with the Deckard's Dream is pretty anxiety provoking. And also it's kind of large compared to something like the Nymphs. Which aims to create similar sounds, but with a lot more limitations, because not all the features are hands-on. On the Deckard's Dream or the CS80 or whatever, what you see is what you get pretty much. And here you also have a bit of menu diving, even though you don't even have a screen, so you have a lot of shift functions and that kind of stuff. But the basic functionality is kind of simple. You have an oscillator, filter, envelope, LFO section, and then when you double tap the shift button or just hold it, now you have these second functionalities that are up here instead of these below here. And then you also can store and select presets and all that stuff. But let's first see how it sounds. Yeah, I think that's kind of lovely, but one of the big limitations that you hear, of course, in comparison, is that it only has one oscillator per voice. But for the technique that I discussed today, this wouldn't be so much of a problem if you use it in a studio, because you could just track every element once, then slightly change the filter settings and add some slight detuning, very tiny bit only. And then track it a second time and do that for all of the elements, because this is basically somewhat analogous to one oscillator section and filter section from the Deckard's Dream, which has two. So you just track it twice, slightly detune it, and then you should get a very similar result. Alright, that's it from my side for today. In case you have any questions, as usual, just let me know in the comments and I'm trying to get back to you ASAP. Apart from that, thanks for tuning in. See you next time. Peace out.